it.
They fled a war somewhere, and they came to somewhere, and they found that their dreams could become reality. And so they dreamed a world into existence. That world became the world of Terra. Some zones it's called the world of Arborea. Terra actually stands for the exiled realm of Arborea. And this is one of the very first changes we made for Terra in the United States and North America, because Arborea is a nonsense word. It means nothing. So if the exiled realm of Arborea, are we exiled from Arborea? Is Arborea a realm of exile? What does it mean? It doesn't make any sense. And so we just stopped talking about it. And it turns out that you could remove the word Arborea from Terra very easily, and it never shows up. So these two titans, they dreamed the world into existence, and then they just kind of settled down and became the physical continents of Terra. And after they settled down, they started to dream all sorts of shit into existence, like gods. And the god who started Terra had the power of creation, so they created their own mortal races that they could interact with. And over thousands of years, they had wars and slavery and sorcery and genocide and evil gods and massive weapons of destruction. And then we launched the game.
And players come into it so late in the story. Like
it's like Carl Sagan, famous cosmologist, astrophysicist, mathematician. He's the guy who kind of redefined what science is and how people should approach science in the 70s and 80s in the United States. I don't know how many people watching this stream saw Carl Sagan on PBS or in school, where a lot of people saw Carl Sagan's videos in school. But he mentions talking about human history, human existence. The human race became distinct from other primates roughly 500,000 years ago. You could say 20,000 years ago. It's the first time you saw actual human beings doing human being stuff. In the history of the Earth, that is this much space. In the history of the universe, it's this much space. So in the history of Terra, Terra literally is 6,000 years old. That you can count, because there are people you can talk to. You can walk up and talk to who are alive 6,000 years ago. The goddess Kaya, the goddess Velek. They were there. They were doing stuff. They met the original heroes and things, and they remember Arun and Shara, the Titans, right? They never got to meet them when they were awake, but they met them. They know of them and how they work. And the gods you're interacting with now are kind of the second or third generation, but there are other gods who are out there who are just straight up off the top. And so there is a literal short window of history that the Terra has, and all the things that you see are less than 6,000 years old. So you don't see a lot of dinosaur fossils because they're still dinosaurs. But the history of what's going on in Terra is 30 years old. It's exactly 30 years old, because that's when the Argons invaded. And that's when all the huge war heroes distinguished themselves in war. In fact, 30 years ago in the world of Terra, the High Elf race was at war with the entire world. They were the bad guys, and they wanted to conquer the entire world because they were the best. They were the best at everything. They had the best magic. They had the highest level of technological sophistication. They knew that they were better than everybody else. And then they got their ass kicked in a tiny little human community when a bunch of other races banded together with the humans and repulsed the invincible elf army and sent them packing back to their desert city. And the elves said, well, we just got our asses handed to us by a bunch of nobodies. Maybe we're the bad guys. Maybe we're doing this all wrong. Let's examine our entire society. And so they kind of sat there in their city for a long time, and they withdrew from all the other places in the world of Terra. And then the Argons invaded, and then the elves said, oh yeah, wait, this is it. This is our moment. Here's where we can make our difference. And so while everybody else is getting their ass kicked, the elves just march out of their city, and they go and they say, hey, all you people getting your ass kicked, go back to our city. We'll take care of you. We've got this. And then all the other races going, you're trying to kill me like 5 years ago. What's the deal? It's like, no, this is it. This is what we're doing now. We're going to save the world. And so people banded together with the elves, and they fought the Argons back. And afterwards, a council of 6 races got together and said, all right, well, we should, not fight each other. We should fight together. And that's how the Valkyrian Federation came to play. And so if you look at some of our lore documents and whatnot, it's like VE or AF, after Federation or after Valkyrian, whatever. But it's a very, very young government. It's like the United States in 1812. It is going to fall apart at any minute. It's held together by this complex web of alliances where all these races remain sovereign states, but they're working together for the greater good. And that's the world that a player jumps into when they first start playing Terra. These days, it doesn't take you an hour and a half to finish the starting area. It takes you 20 minutes. And then if you play the game the way I do, it takes you 4 hours to get to level 65. Now, this guy take you 4 weeks, but it doesn't take that long to get to level 65, right? Because you don't have to go through all that story anymore. You don't have to nail it all down and make it a part of your internal psyche, and especially when you have as many characters as I do. But if you're first starting to play TERA, right, there's still a good through line of story that takes you through a lot of stuff. It just has nothing to do with the gods until you're about level 50.
Where does the story of the giants and the dragons and the Amon race fit in?
That's nowhere these days. But there was a giant empire, right? This was a couple thousand years back, in between the first and second Divine Wars. And I'm going really fast, throwing a bunch of concepts that a lot of you probably don't understand. But there was a giant war between the giants and the elves, and the giants and the divas, to be more exact. And the giants had a literal continent-spanning empire. They had highways that went from one continent to another. That's how sophisticated they were, and everything worked. And the divas said, no, we run the world. And if you don't know what a diva is, they're Castanics. The Castanics are actually Clan Castanic, one of the many clans of divas that eventually broke off to be their own separate governmental unit. The divas retreated to northern Arun and just took that over instead, which happens to be where the giants used to live. So the giants got their asses kicked. And overnight, when the gods intervened, the giants were just destroyed like that. Their whole civilization was wiped from the map. Almost all of them were killed. And their stuff was just left lying around while the divas took over one part of it, and then everybody else kind of went, that's a pretty nice city. What I can do with that? That's about 2,000 years back. And the giants used to enslave the Amon. The giants used to enslave the Amon because their patron god was killed very early in the First Divine War. They were enslaved. They had these collars put on them that they wore from birth to death. Amon shot troops literally had lances and shields welded onto their hands, and so they couldn't feed themselves. They couldn't care for themselves. They were shot troops meant to die. They were sent out to fight elves and fight divas, and whoever the giants said, hey, go fight this. It was a more or less unstoppable army for a very long time until the god Lok and the god Kaya pretty much took pity on them. And they said, well, we got to free these people. This doesn't work for me. Kaya identified with the Amon so strongly that she actually took the form of a female Amon and lived among them with no godly powers for a while Lok and his trusted artisans in Castanic worked out a way to break the collars and free the Amon. And so the Amon and Castanics have an unbreakable bond, right? They are together. You will always see them working together because the Castanics played a huge role in freeing the Amon from the slavery of the giants. And Kaya, of course, lived among them as an Amon, knew what it was to be a slave, and was right there with them when they seized their independence. So when they revere Kaya as their shield maiden and patron goddess, they fucking mean it, because Kaya was there for them thousands of years ago. And she remembers what it was for Amon to be slaves. And she says, yeah, it's not happening anymore. So in today's storyline, Kaya is a giant deal. She is one of the three main goddesses who has stayed on TERA, in the world of TERA, and interacted with the mortal races. And whenever something goes pie-shaped, she says, no, that's not right. No, we need to go. And so she'll go out there and she'll start a war, because that's what she does. And Velik lives in Velika, and she says, oh, we want peace and prosperity, but she's the goddess of the hunt, right? She's got her own mad skills. And the goddess Mistel is the goddess of fate. She's kind of unstuck in time, and she can see the future, she can see the past, she can see the potential within people, and she interacts with the player characters a lot, because it's like, yeah, I've seen the future and you're in it. So why don't you pick up that rock over there and maybe put it on top of that other rock? I'm just saying, maybe something will happen if you do that. And turns out you gain a level. Those gods are still interacting with people, and there's a few other gods running around who remember what it was like when they had all the power in the world. But Lok isn't there anymore. He got killed in a bad way because he was betrayed, and then ripped apart and spread over 2 provinces. And so when there's a cult of Lok, there's a bunch of deluded fools that think they can find all the pieces and put them back together, and then Lok will just go, hey, everybody, how's it going? That's not happening. Dude's dead. But the Amon and the Castanics, they're not as down on Lok as everybody else, because like Lok was a pretty cool dude, man. He showed us how to blacksmith and make giant roses that float in the sky and break shackles on slaves.
So then we got the Papori and the Elin over in their 2/3 of the way through the Story of TERA for players. We get the Reaper class, which is not supposed to be a thing for an Elin. So run us through that.
So here's the deal with the Elin and the Papori. So it's no big secret to anybody who's read anything at all about TERA that the Ellen and the Purpuri were originally meant to be the same race. That's how they were designed, that's how they're portrayed in every region but North America. We came up with a cool backstory that worked out a little better. So the Ellen are the spiritual children of the goddess Elenu, Elinu. The goddess Elenu was the wife of the god Keris. The elves in the game call themselves the children of Keris because Keris was the patron god of the elves. And I say elves and not high elves because there used to be a whole bunch of different kinds of elves who lived different kinds of lives, and the high elves are the only ones left. That's a long story conversation about a story that I wrote about that for another stream. Keris and Elinu loved each other very much, and they wanted to have the races that they had created be friends and be, the preeminent races of the world of Terra. It turns out that Elinu was a pretty good patron to the elves, the same way that Keris was. But then one day, she just kind of got sick, and she got depressed. And a whole bunch of crazy stuff happened. Like, there used to be a light in the sky that kept the entire world lit up all the time. It was called the First Light. And if it sounds Tolkien-esque, it's because it is. But the First Light was cursed by Keris when nobody would help Elinu wake up from her deep and pretty much deadly sleep. She was depressed, she fell asleep, and then she kind of died in the way that gods kind of die, in that they don't wake up and talk to you anymore. But you're a god, right? You were dreamed into existence by two sleeping titans. It's not like you can just kind of wink out. So she went to sleep and never woke up, and Keris was pretty pissed out about that. And he said, hey, you guys don't help me, I'm going to turn off the sun. And they said, dude, we don't know how to wake her up. And so he turned off the sun, and then everyone was pissed. And then Keris just kind of went away. And then Elinu not only was asleep, but she somehow sunk to the bottom of a lake that's outside of Port Elinu, where she sleeps today. And then the god Balder ripped his eyes out, threw them into the sky, and lit up the entire world.
As you do.
As you do, because, Balder.
Yeah.
He's a cool dude. And it turned out that not having eyes didn't stop him from being a really cool dude and the leader of the gods. But afterwards, after the light went up into the sky and everything came up, these beings started to rise up out of the lake. And they were formed as childlike versions of the goddess Elenu, and they were the Ellen. And so the Ellen aren't like, in North American lore, aren't like other races in that they have mamas and papas and they have little baby Ellens, because they're not. They wake up that day one day and they know who they're going to be in life. Because they rise up out of the lake and they say, I have a spark of the goddess Elenu in me, and here's what I'm going to do with my life. I'm going to be a lancer, I'm going to be a sorcerer, I'm going to farm this patch of land over here and grow carrots. Every one of them knows who they are when they wake up, and they go and they do that. And they had a pretty decent kingdom going. But as it happens, that some of them turned out to be generals. And then when you need to have a war, generals are really important, but there aren't a lot of foot soldiers, because who wants to wake up to be a foot soldier when there's no war? So they found out a way to use that same divine spark of the goddess Elenu to raise armies almost instantly. And so they would go out into the forest and they would uplift animals. And they would say, you raccoons and you dogs and you beavers or whoever other animals are on here, guess what? You're in the army now. And they shared their divine spark, and they raised up a bunch of animals to become Purpuri. And it turns out that they were a little smarter about how to create races than goddess Elenu was, because Purpuri can interbreed with each other, because even though they're coded as male, clearly there are female Purpuri, since there are little bitty Purpuri. And Purpuri were originally designed to be shock troops in wars directed by Ellen generals. And that worked out pretty well for a long time until Times of Peace. And then they just, Purpuri started making other Purpuri. But anytime they want, the Ellen generals can go out and raise up a bunch of new Purpuris. And so it's called the Purpuri Kingdom because there are more Purpuris than there are Ellens. But there's an Ellen princess. There's a bunch of Ellen princesses. There's not technically a Purpuri king or an Ellen queen, because you can't walk up and talk to them. But you can walk up and talk to Ellen princesses whenever you want.
So how's the Reaper happen?
The Reaper happens because of a race called the Orcans, right? Orcans may sound like orcs because they're orcs. And if that sounds like Tolkien, it should. So the Orcans were a constructed race made by evil gods that were trying to figure out how to replicate the Purpuri experiment. The Tuangi, the Kalkari, and the Orcans were all constructed races. They were mishmashed together from different parts, different races, and a whole bunch of blood magic. And the Orcans were the most successful of all those. But the Orcans didn't have their own place to live, right? They're an army. They're an army without a home. And so they're organized into tribal bands, and then every so often one of them will get the bright idea to invade somewhere. And the Red Fang Orcans were the ones that invaded the Isle of Dom when it first rose out of the ocean. There's a bunch of different, there's black feather Orcans or something other scar Orcans. It's a ton of different Orcans. I don't have them at my fingertips because I deleted all my TERA files. But a group of Orcans decided that, that Purpuri Kingdom, that's a pretty cool place to live. Why don't we go live there? We'll grab all our dudes, we'll go down there. And so the Orcans invaded Port Elenu and Purpuria and just lit shit on fire. They lit the big city on fire. They lit a bunch of camps on fire. They started dumping toxic waste in the lake. They were doing all sorts of stuff. So yeah, we're going to live here now, and y'all need to leave. And since the Ellen and the Purpuria had already invited the vampires in to come and live with them because their home had been destroyed by a horrible natural catastrophe and the fact that they made a deal with the followers of Loke to get a blood curse, everyone was ineffectual about the fact that the Orcans just come in and blow all their shit up. And so one day, Little Reaper started to rise up out of the lake because the Ellen generals needed someone who was willing to fight as fiercely as the Orcans. And it turns out that crazy psychopathic scythe-wielding Ellens, who normally would have been awesome, cool people, right? You play a Reaper, there is nothing to do but kill. There is no upside or downtime for a Reaper. There is just kill, 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 kill. And you're mashing that space bar as hard as you can to kill as fast as you can and do whatnot. And that's essentially the design philosophy and the lore behind the Reaper, which is one of the last things I worked on in my first writing stint back after being laid off. We knew that was coming and how they were going to be. We actually talked a lot about what to call them. A Reaper was the easiest way to do it because they had giant scythes.
Chain Maiden.
What?
Chain Maiden. I wanted so bad to play Chain Maiden.
So if you look at the strings of TERA, and this is not too big of a secret, they're actually called the Soulless because they have the spark of Elenu because they're Ellens, but they don't act like Ellens act, and it's a giant metaphor for PTSD and what to do with your soldiers when you don't have a war. But you've got these Ellen who have no purpose other than to kill. And if you don't give them someone to kill, what are they good for, right? They can't do anything. Yeah, so that's what Reapers are. And ninjas are a little different, right? They're raised up from the lake like every other Ellen, but they're trained in secret. And so they wake up straight out of the lake, say, hey, I think I'm supposed to be a ninja. And there's a ninja there who says, oh yeah, you're a ninja, come with me. And then they get trained as a ninja. And then when the need was great, and then they had to have ninjas, they unleashed them on the world and said, hey, guess what? We've got ninjas for you. Congratulations, everyone. We saved the world again.
So I think that only leaves us with Baraka.
All right. So the Baraka are giants. They are actually a sub-race of giants who were spared the great destruction of the fall of the giant empire. And they were spread out all around the world, right? And the process for making tiny Baraka, unknown, because we've never seen a tiny Baraka. We've only seen big Baraka. And if you go to the Baraka city of Highwatch, which is way up in northern Arun, which is only recently revealed when we broke the storm barrier and the Federation went up there. So they showed up to save the Baraka, who were doing just fine. They had a city. They were all over the place. They were doing the same stuff they do everywhere else in the world. They're just scholars and warriors and whatever. It's like, no, yeah, we're Baraka. So the Baraka have been as they always were, and they are a sub-race of giants. If you go look at the few giants that are left in the world, they look pretty much exactly like Baraka. If you know, Baraka have better beards and sometimes better head spiky things. I have several Barakas. I tend to dress them up in teddy bear costumes because, come on, why wouldn't you? One of the crazy things about Barakas is that their arms are different lengths. And no one knows why. It's just an artifact of the concept art and design period. And they're just weird looking. And so when you put them in costumes, their arms are the same length. And that's what I like. If you put them in stuff like the tuxedos or the serious business suit, it just evens stuff out because that's the way the models are fit.
I never noticed that.
I could be drunk. I don't know. I'm saying that right now because it seems like something that makes sense.
I'll go with it.
Yeah, it sounds
now,
great.
It is now canon.
I'm a writer. I make shit up. That's not canon. I don't work for you, me. That's somebody else's problem.